And we're live.
All right, hey, I hope everyone's doing well. It's so good once again to be joining everyone with another Sparks in the Dark podcast. And we are welcoming back today Jennifer Lagarde. We had a conversation with Jennifer Lagarde back in February, and we said we're going to do part two soon. But now here we are in April, and it's so good to have her back. But before we go any further, I just want to say once again, Sparks in the Dark, our podcast is a place where we want to have deep conversations about reading and writing, about how literacy affects us. And we try to invite and have been successful so far in inviting people who help us extend that thinking, help us think beyond ourselves, where we are, where we're teaching, where we're working, and helping us to dig deeper into how literacy can affect us, influence us, and help us see the world, help us see it differently. And like I said already, we're so glad to have Jennifer Lagarde with us again.
Hey everyone, I'm excited to be here.
So I'm Todd Nesloni. I am the other co-host for this podcast. I'm an elementary principal here in Texas. If you watch the other one, Jennifer is one of our favorite people on the planet. So we're
Yeah.
super excited for this. And so do you want to introduce yourself, Travis?
Yeah, I kind of jumped over that. Yeah, I
You're
can do.
so famous, everyone knows you. I don't know why
Why should I have to worry about introducing myself? I am Travis Crowder. I'm a seventh grade English language arts and social studies teacher in Hidnite, North Carolina, which is in the western part of the state. And this is a passion of mine, reading and writing, talking about it, and getting to talk with people. So it's so good to be joining with you.
So Jennifer, we have so much to talk about, and we know that you and Travis love to talk. And so we are going to jump right into this.
Oh my
and
gosh,
just talk
throwing
about
some shade right off the bat.
Hey, that's how we roll. Come on, y'all know. So, talk to me a little bit, Jennifer. When you are looking, let's talk about books because we have so many things that we talked about last time that we really want to focus a lot of our conversation today just about picking books, advertising books, filling your classroom with books. So, let's start with just talking about picking books out. So, when you are looking for a book to read, what are some qualities that you look for in a book?
Well, I think I'm like any other reader in that, my tastes change. They vary. I get stuck on a certain genre or sort of type of book for a while. And then I get real tired of that and have to switch to something else. But honestly, as I get a little bit older, I have really focused in the last few years on trying to find books that push me out of my comfort zone a little bit, that feature characters that don't look like me, whose experiences may be different from mine, to help me understand another person's take on life. It's because I feel like we're so polarized now that sometimes, especially living in a very digital world, our algorithms are out there to customize our feeds, so we end up seeing a lot of opinions that are exactly like our own, and books provide us an opportunity to very intentionally look outside of that and explore some points of view that are different from ours. So, and also I think now I am, like a lot of people, am trying to be really intentional about focusing on books that are written by authors who also represent the characters, who are writing from a place of truth because their lives reflect the characters that they're writing about. So those things are important to me. I'm not saying every book I read meets that criteria. Sometimes I just, pick up a book because it's interesting or because somebody has recommended it highly to me. But when I'm looking at what to read next, I think about those things because reading is about more than just pleasure. Although it gives me a great deal of pleasure, I feel like it helps us be better people. And in order to do that, you sometimes have to think about people who are different from you.
I love that. I love everything that you just said because, when we think about a reading life, when we think about the development of a reading life, all three of us, we have these. We've developed them, we've cultivated them, we've sought out books that will help us grow as people. And although we do follow, our passions when it comes to reading, we want to pick something that's going to, entertain us, is going to meet that need, because it is, you're right, it's pleasurable reading, it is about that. But we also, I love that you said we want to go for things that extend our thinking, things that are going to make us go beyond, because it's, I know I have a tendency at times to create an echo chamber,
Mm-hmm.
and
we all do. I think that's very natural.
Right. And, we want to surround ourselves with thinking that is reflective of what we already think. But, whenever we go after pieces of literature, pieces of writing, whether it be articles, books, podcasts, even music, that will change, that will help us dig deeper. That's where, we stretch ourselves and grow as readers. So I want to take that and put a little bit of a spin on it and think about the power of talk. We talk so much about reading and about independent reading and about how books move us and they change us. Talk with us a little bit about conversation about books. What does a conversation about a book look like to you?
I'm going to answer that question, I promise, but I want to add something to what you just said and about the books that we select when we read. And that is, I think a lot of our lives in today's society are spent sharing. We spend a lot of our time, whether it's posting pictures of our lunch on Instagram or posting a review of a product that we buy on Amazon or sharing what happened that day on Facebook. We spend a lot of our time talking and listening, whether it's face-to-face or in a digital capacity. We do a lot of time talking. And I feel like reading provides us with an opportunity to listen and to hear other people's opinions and other people's perspectives, because our digital lives, I just don't think they're set up for that. And we've become, as a society as a whole, I think, less adept at listening to others. And so reading, I think, helps us sharpen those skills. And if that's the case, if as I believe it to be, then I want to select books that are going to provide me with the opportunity to listen to stories I need to hear. So go ahead. What were you going to say, Todd?
I was going to say, we were talking about, before we move into this conversation thing, Travis, I was wondering for you, Travis, too, what do you look for in a book? Because, I think about me, and I don't know if this is the elementary educator in me, but, since I've broadened my reading horizons over the last year and a half, I tend to veer towards similar topic books, but I'm also drawn to covers. Like when I'm just looking through, it's like, ooh, that cover looks really cool. I'm going to pick that up and I'm going to read it, even if the back doesn't sound that interesting, because I love the cover. And so I wonder if either of you are like that as well, or if that's just the elementary kid in me going, that's a cover. Let me have that one. I don't care if it sounds good or not.
Oh, no, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I just was visiting a library where the librarian was building a display that I thought was so clever, which was it was called Great Books with Ugly Covers. Because we all do that. We do judge a book by its cover. The misnomer that we don't, or that we shouldn't, is just, I don't know. I just feel like it's an empty sort of platitude in a way, because we do look at covers, and if they don't look interesting, we don't want to dive into what might be on the inside. So, and I think that's a really interesting way to have a conversation with a kid or even with an adult about books and about reading, because especially if kids or any learner of any age doesn't see themselves as a reader or doesn't see the value of reading for them, then sometimes having a conversation about what's on the cover can be an interesting foray into making them feel like maybe this is something that would be worthwhile for them. I think as I've gotten older, and I keep mentioning that because I recently have a birthday and officially very old, but I have started talking more. And I'm going to use some language that my friend Pete Kajia, who's a librarian in North Carolina, uses. But I have started to take the time to talk more about books and reading in terms of the way they make me feel, as opposed to the plot points, the literary merits, the quality of the language. I may mention those things, particularly to people who I know will appreciate them, because that's a point of reference for them and who they are. But for the most part, I talk about books in the way that they spark a reaction in me, the way they touch my heart, the way they make me angry, the way they make me have a question. I want to talk about the way a book burrows itself into my soul, as opposed to, what its merits may be according to someone who's an educator, because most readers are not educators. And especially for kids, I think two things are true. Number one, that's how you're going to hook them, is if you talk about the way a book affects you. But number two, I think, gosh, that's a wonderful point, a place to build a relationship with the kid, to know that have the child know, or any reader of any age, that you have those feelings in common. To talk to a kid about how a book made you cry because you could empathize with the main character who experienced something similar to you. And oftentimes with younger readers, I won't talk about what that thing is. I'll say, gosh, this character went through something that I went through when I was in the 8th grade. And, I went through a whole box of tissues reading this book. It just tore me up. And then later on, when the kid is reading it, we can have a conversation about what that thing is. And it gives us an opportunity to reveal a little something about ourselves, our humanity. And that's the thing that connects us, And
I think a good point that you're making here is that when you have reluctant readers, if you can introduce them to the fact that you're going to have an emotional reaction from reading this, and not just you're reading this to learn or you're reading this to be a better reader kind of thing, because that's what I've noticed as I've talked books to 3rd and 4th graders, is that the moment you say, I couldn't stop laughing in this book, it was so hilarious, or this book made me cry so much, just remembering the things that happened, like you said, in your own life, then they're like, I want that emotional reaction too. Right. So I'm going to pick this book up because I want to feel something when I read. And I think too often as educators, especially as elementary, I think we're so focused on just getting them to read that we don't focus on the emotional side. Just like you were saying, it's just like, hey, this book's really interesting. Hey, you may like horses, so read this book. Or you may like soccer, so read this book. And when we get the emotion, that's when we hook kids like crazy, because my kids recently that have been so hungry to get books out of my library have been like, I read this, I loved it. I need a book that's going to make me feel the way this one made me feel.
Right.
And then a whole different conversation.
I love that, because what you do when we share those parts of it that made us cry, they made us laugh, they connected us to these characters. What we're doing is, one, we're humanizing the reading experience, which so few students, it seems, that in my experience, they come to me, reading hasn't been humanized in their eyes. They don't know how to connect. But then on top of that, you're modeling that connection for them, which I think is powerful. This is how it touched me. And as a reader, this is how I share that with other people. This is how I talk about it. That's powerful.
But by the time, this is the reality of it. I hate to phrase it this way, but the reality is that by the time your students reach you, Travis, or even by the time you get to talk to them about a book, Todd, or when I got to talk to kids about books as a high school librarian, the sad reality is, for too many kids, we're the first people to talk to children about books in that way. Right. For too many kids, reading has become relegated to a skill, with the emphasis being on mechanics and decoding, and what benefits you might reap from reading are all about a test, an assessment, of passing a grade level, etc., creating a project, making a diorama, filling out some note cards, all of those things that are meaningless, not only because kids just aren't interested in that, but because that's not how real readers read. To the point where we have neglected the idea that reading serves a fundamental purpose for our lives as humans, that stories connect us, that stories help us not only recognize our own humanity and have our own experiences validated, but they also help us recognize and validate the humanity of others. It's a critical part of human beings. Since human beings have existed on the planet, one of the things that we have in common with prehistoric people is that we told stories. The art of storytelling, whether it's like, figures scrawled on a cave wall or written in the digital sphere, human beings tell stories because those are the things that connect humanity. And in school, we have, frankly, just removed that from the conversation because we're so focused on the mechanics and the skill. And I think we're paying a heavy price for it in a lot of ways that would veer us way off into the philosophical, but it certainly hasn't yielded the kind of results that we've been hoping for in terms of test scores and assessment. We're no better off 20 years after No Child Left Behind than we were then. And we've spent 20 years turning out test takers instead of readers. So we have to, if we want different results, we have to change the model. The good news is we know what works. I mean, we have decades and decades of research to prove that just putting kids in places where they are surrounded by books and giving them the opportunity to read for authentic reasons is what works. We just have to have the will to do it.
So I want to jump into this next question about our class.
Quick, Todd.
Yeah.
I want to encourage educators listening to this. Whenever they go back to, they get their next group of students, and they are not their next group, but they get their, they go back to work, they go back into their classrooms, to think about talking about a book in terms of the emotion. Mm-hmm. What is the emotional underside of this book? How did it make you feel? How did you connect to it? And forego sometimes the lengthy, protracted synopses that we'll give. We whenever we love a book, we want to linger in the summary of it, that because we can't get it out of our minds, but we connect to things through emotion. And I just want to encourage educators to do that, because I feel like that will be powerful. I plan on doing that, talking about that more.
I love
Sorry,
that.
Tom.
No, I think you hit a nail on the head, and that's one thing that we really want to stress through there. But I want to talk about classroom libraries because that is a huge piece. And one thing Travis and I talk about in our book is that when building classroom libraries, we're not talking about reading teacher classroom libraries. We're talking about classroom libraries in every subject, in every grade, because the moment you relegate a classroom library to a reading or writing classroom, you're telling a child the only place you're going to find books is in a classroom that is about that. But I want to talk about building those libraries, because some teachers really struggle with, what do I even begin to put in the library? How do I know where to begin? And I know for me, my struggle has always been organizing my library. And I thought of both of you today, because my office library that my students kind of pick from is just a bunch of books. Mm-hmm. And so I thought of you because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to talk to both of them today. And I got to tell them this because they're going to give me a hard time. I was sitting with the girl. She, in the last month, I started book talking to her class a month ago. She has gone through 7 of my books. Okay. She brings one about every 2 days. And I told her, I was like, you are my biggest reader here. And she's very particular. Like, I will book talk books. And she was like, none of those interest me. You need to try again. And it's a little 3rd grader. So it's awesome.
It's her name Jennifer.
What did you say?
I said, is her name Jennifer?
Oh, yeah, pretty much. So, but we're sitting there today and we're looking at my shelf, and I said, okay, so tell me something you're interested in. And she said, well, I really liked the type of character that was in this one. I want to read another book with a strong female character that is multiracial. And I said, okay. So we're looking at books, and I was like, oh, I have Full Cicada Moon. I said, let me find it. And I'm looking through, and I'm like, I know it's here. And she said, Mr. Neslony, if you would organize your library by like the types of characters that are in them, or the kind of stories they have, or the ones that have animals, it would be a lot easier to find and recommend books for kids whenever you're doing this. And I thought, okay, Jennifer and Travis.
High five to that.
I know I need to organize this, but even for me, like, I was never a language arts teacher. And so that's scary for me to organize it. I know I'm getting off from the original question, but it's scary for me.
What's the worst thing that can happen, Todd?
But like, for me, it's like, okay, I'm going to organize it by genre. And it's like, and I know this is stupid, but this is just me talking through my thoughts here. But I'm like, I don't want to put books in the wrong genre.
And what happens?
I don't want to put books and I know there is no wrong. I know the lecture you guys are going to give. I can see it already in your eyes and on your faces. But I think that's a real fear that a lot of teachers have, is I don't even know like I'm not, I think some teachers would think I'm not well versed enough in all the genres that I don't want to incorrectly organize these books, or I don't want to turn a reader off because I put a book in this genre when it's not, or things like that. Or even teachers who said, I bought these books because the kids requested them, but I haven't read them, so I don't know yet where they fall. And so it's kind of scary to do that. You guys are like reading professionals, so I know it comes second nature to y'all, but for people like me, I'm like, that's hard. I want somebody there to hold my hand and help me.
It is hard work to genreify something.
It is.
Jennifer knows how difficult it is. Jennifer, I'm going to let you speak to that first, and then I'll follow up.
I have so many things to say about this, so y'all need to settle in, okay?
All right.
Exactly. Get comfy, because this is gonna go on right here, okay? But first is that, any teacher who is wanting to create a classroom library, you have to think about it as the proverbial marathon versus the sprint. It is a multi-year project, and it never ends. It's a marathon that never ends. If you are going to be the curator of a collection of books for kids, you never finish. You may get to a point where it's less about having enough books per student and more about making sure that the books you have are good representations for your kids and that are high interest and meeting their needs, but you're never finished. So you have to, number one, just look at it that way, that it is for the lifetime of your career as a teacher, it's going to continue to be a work in progress. The second thing is that the place to start is by buying the first book, and the way that you choose that first book is the same way in a lot of ways, that you will choose the second and the 22nd and the 2000th book. And that is focusing on your readers. What do your readers need? And I'm not talking about a reading level or whether or not there's some kind of AR or reading counts or some other ridiculous formative assessment or summative assessment that goes with that book. I'm talking about what do they need as readers to help them develop a life that is enriched and empowered by story, to help them become that third grade student who can't wait to come back and get another book, or that seventh grade student who for the very first time in your class finishes an entire book. What books do those kids need to help them become readers? All along your journey as a curator of a collection, that should be your first and primary question. Reading material that you use in a guided reading way or as an instructional resource is different. You select that based on what you know are the instructional needs for your kids. But your classroom library, which exists to surround kids with print, to create a culture in which reading is profoundly important and that helps them grow into the kind of human beings that readers grow into, that has to be entirely about them and their emotional needs. So that's how you buy book 1, and that's how you continue to purchase books 2, 10, and 500, etc. And whether those books come from yard sales, which I've purchased many a book from.
I have too. Thrift store.
Exactly. Thrift stores, used bookstores, from the Amazon card you got for your birthday, or from, in an ideal world, a budget that you're able to have from your school. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. But I want to add one more thing here that I think is incredibly important, because I get this question a lot as someone who works with school librarians who worries that an investment on the part of the school in classroom libraries is a disinvestment in the idea of a school library. And I don't think this is a unfounded worry, because for some schools, it really is a matter of robbing Peter to play Paul, where it really is X number of dollars, which is never enough, has been allotted to the school library in the past, but now we're going to take half of that away and we're going to also fund these school libraries. And so for school librarians, that becomes a concern. And I want to address that and say, first of all, that anybody who is interested in helping kids grow to become readers, whether they're a classroom teacher, a school librarian, a principal, etc., we should welcome the idea that kids will be surrounded with books and materials everywhere. That's the first thing. But leadership matters. And for all those admins who are listening out there, I will never forget my own principal when in my school there was a push to help encourage teachers to start building these classroom libraries, and there were some funds available. My principal said, I expect the libraries in your classroom to be the gateway drug to the books in this room. And we were all sitting in the school library. You're never going to have enough just by virtue of the physical space and constraints monetarily to have enough books for every child. But the books in your library should make these kids want to come down to the school library and get more. It's not a question of either or. It's a question of everywhere in the school having kids surrounded by print, whether they go in the principal's office, their math teacher's classroom, or the school library, they should have access to books. And it's up to school leaders to, number one, fund that to whatever extent is possible. And I know that there's a finite amount of money. I don't, live in a fantasy world where everybody has a blank checkbook, but also articulate it in a way that makes everyone on the staff know and understand that this is about creating a school-wide culture of reading, and that one collection isn't, I guess, privileged over another.
Right.
Gosh, that's so true. And I'm going to follow up. Wow. Jennifer, when you got finished, you should have held out your microphone and just let it go.
Lagarde out. Right.
I want to say one more thing to that, Todd, about genrifying a library, because I know it is daunting. Whenever you begin thinking about building a classroom library, I know that was daunting for me, but it starts with one. It starts with one book. And for other educators, other people who are thinking, how do I begin organizing all of these? And even you, Todd, I love to pull children into that process. I love to pull my kids into the process of giving them a chance to touch every individual book. I like the idea of pulling all of the books off the bookshelf at the beginning of the year and letting them be a part of the arrangement process. I've even gone so far as to, on a reading inventory, say, list the genres that are in my classroom library, and letting students know, what is it? What is a genre that you would like to see? These do not meet your needs. If these genres don't make sense to you, or you're not so sure, then we need to find genre or label the books. Organize them and label them in a way that will be simple enough, easy enough, give you a way to access it, and even taking simple and easy out. Something that's going to draw you in. What's going to make you say, there's a book in that genre I want to read.
Yeah, and I think I didn't even touch on the genreification piece, but so I want to add a couple things to what Travis said. I agree with everything that you said, and I absolutely think students should be involved. But I think a good place to start is think about a genre that kids are always asking for. If your kids are saying, Mr. Nitsloni, I want a funny book, or I want books that are about skateboarding, or whatever it is, then start by just pulling that genre. Start by pulling that, label those books in a way that makes them easy to find. And it doesn't have to be fancy labels that you buy from, some company. I used to just use multicolored stickers, and I knew that a green sticker meant a mystery, or that a blue sticker meant fantasy. And I had a little legend that I kept in my library so kids could know too. Okay. Because you can do it in a way that's really inexpensive. But I'd start by pulling books that are asked for a lot. And those books that you don't know, that's okay. As a kid reads them, then that's a great question to ask and say, I have been trying to figure out where this book should go in the library, which category. So when you get done reading it, I'm looking forward to hearing what you think. And if later on you decide that book needs to go somewhere else, then you just pull the sticker off and put a different one on. There's no harm, no foul. It's definitely not the end of the world. And I think what you'll find, I'm sure Travis has, is that kids will surprise you in terms of thinking really pretty deeply about what the genres should be. One example that I use a lot in my library, in the first library that I genrefied had over 22,000 books in it. So you're talking about a school library, a massive collection, and fiction and nonfiction. And I remember kids saying things to me like, Miss Lagarde, it's good that we have a military section, but I think we should divide it out so that there's a section that's military vehicles, and then there's a section that's just the branches, because sometimes I just want to read about tanks. I don't want to know what you have to do to get in the Army. So for them, they think deeply about what they want as a reader, and then they help you figure out what those categories should be. So there's no right or wrong, that, but one easy way to start is just think about what your kids are asking for and make that your first genre. And then, it's not something you go in on a weekend and genreify your whole collection. It is something that takes time to do. So if you think about it in terms of one genre at a time, then you give yourself permission to let this happen over many, many months or years even. It took me 3 years to genreify that 22,000 book collection.
Well, I think you said something that immediately made me breathe a sigh of relief when you made the comment of sit there and do it with your students. And for whatever reason, that's not something that had even crossed my mind. And so sitting here and going, well, that takes all the pressure off, because my library isn't for me. It's for them. And so if they are comfortable with the way that we're organizing it and they can help me find books that we're looking for, then I've done my job, whether the genre was correct or not. Now they have taken ownership of that. So I love that. So thank you guys both for sharing that kind of piece of information, because that was a big thing for me. I want to talk real quick, though, Jennifer, about some people just knowing, where do they even begin with building, enhancing, or curating, or sustaining their classrooms? I know you said, just start with buying one book. But for teachers who are looking for information, I know, Travis, one thing you do, and Donna Lynn mentions this too, Donna Lynn Miller, about doing reading inventories of just seeing what your kids are interested in and starting with that. Because one thing that I've learned recently is the difference between a book flood and a book desert, and all these things about how sometimes you go into a classroom and they may have 600 books and the kids aren't reading them because there's 600 books that the kids that year could care less about. Mm-hmm. There's no interest in there. Some of them are from 1921 and they're still holding together. But it's just, where do I even begin as a teacher to know, I know you can just start with one book. I get that. But for some people, we need a little more, tell me somewhere I can go. Where's a resource that you go to when you're looking for the cutting edge books or those that are just coming out that everybody's talking about?
Okay, well, first of all, I would also point to Travis's work and interest inventories with kids. And Donalyn, of course, mentions that as well. I would veer away, depending on your students, in even calling them reading inventories. I would think about them as interest or passion inventories, so that it's not, it's not automatically, it doesn't turn some kids off who haven't found that book for them yet. It's more about what interests them rather than about books, because some of them will shut down immediately and say, I've never read a book that interests me, and then they're done, right? So there's that. But I also think that there are tons of places to find information about good books. Obviously, you can join a community like Goodreads, where you can connect with other readers who are constantly recommending books. And even there are plenty of authors there that share their reads. I find Instagram to be an excellent social media for hearing about new books. Plenty of people, especially authors, are there. And what I find really interesting about author Instagram feeds as opposed to their Twitter feeds or even Facebook is that I see a lot of authors sharing other people's books on Instagram. This is a book that just absolutely floored me. Then they'll show a picture of it, etc. You can subscribe to professional journals, of course, if you want to spend that money. They are certainly.
Well, I want to talk about what you just said, though, Jennifer. I think that was a really great one of finding authors you love and following them.
Yes.
Because one thing that I can say to that, and I haven't done this until recently, is the last 2 books that I bought, I only bought because I saw Jeff Zintner Instagram about one of them and Nick Stone Instagram about the other. And it's like, that was the only reason I bought them, because I love those authors. And I was like, oh, well, if they say they're good and they're bragging about it, I'm going to go read it too.
And for some reason, Instagram, maybe because it's, the visual piece there on Instagram where, there you can post pictures of either book snaps or the cover itself. That just seems to be, for me, the richest place for book recommendations. And you can follow hashtags on Instagram as well. Search for hashtags. There's plenty of Bookstagram and lots of people who post about books on Instagram, but especially authors. And, to me, it's like anything else. How do you find good recommendations for restaurants or for whatever? You have a community that you turn to. So you have to start curating and cultivating a community of readers that you can chat with about books. The 3 of us talk about books all the time, along with lots of other, educator friends of ours who are readers. And what I would encourage teachers to do is find yourself a posse, find a teacher, start with one teacher who likes to read, and then, add from there, but find some friends, because people who know you, know your school, know your kids, who are also readers, will have some pretty interesting insights into what kinds of books might be good for your kids. So it's just like, anything else. It's so much easier to do if you have friends, as opposed to trying to do it on your own. It's not a solitary journey, find some people.
I'm glad you said that too, because you two are the reason that my reading life is what it is. And I've said this before, and some people may think I'm making it up, but like whenever I need a new book and I don't know what to do, I mean, you are my first people I go to. And Jennifer, you're always like, have you tried this one? And then this one, and then this one, and then this one. And I'm like, oh my gosh, now my Amazon card is full, because I just asked Jennifer for one and she just gave me like 20. And then Travis is like, read this. It's amazing. It's going to change your life. You're going to cry. And so I'm like, okay, that's the one I'll read next, Travis. And so, but it's because I know that I love reading books that are recommended by my friends, because as soon as I'm done reading it, I have somebody to talk to who's going to understand what I read. I'm not just some crazy person saying, you have to read this book, it's so amazing. I can go and say, okay, let's talk about that ending, or let's talk about this. Like, I just read Jason Reynolds, is it All the Way Down?
Long Way Down.
Long Way Down. And I loved now I'm hearing an echo, Travis. I loved that book so much. I couldn't put it down. I was so into it. Travis, I'm echoing again. Okay. I was so into it. I couldn't put it down. And then I get to the end and I was like, seriously? I am not happy. And I called Travis right away and he was like, I told you were going to like the book. He said, and yeah, let's talk about that ending, and let's talk about how I use it in class. And it was nice just to have somebody to talk about that understood what I was talking about right away. And that's what books do when you read them with your friends.
I'm glad you mentioned this. I think it's very, very important for us to stop thinking about reading as a solitary activity that we just do by ourselves. Because while the act of decoding the words from the page may be something you do primarily alone, when you read a book and it touches you in some way, the first thing you want to do is share it with somebody. Reading is a social activity. That's why book clubs and book chats and all those things are so popular and important, because we want to share when a book connects with us in some way. And that's another thing I think we don't give kids enough opportunity to do. We don't give them enough time to reflect in general in school. But when it comes to reading, we don't give them the opportunity to really talk about how books touch them emotionally. And I just think that's a critical piece that we miss sometimes.
All right, so I want to say something to that because it's so important to mention to people listening. What we just did right there was a perfect model to take back and use with students. What you and Todd did, talking about, Todd saying, this was a great book, let's talk about that ending. Or, let's talk about how, that is a perfect model to use. So I encourage people to use that because you're right. You're right, Jennifer. Back in the 1930s, Louise Rosenblatt, which I know you're familiar with her, Jennifer, she wrote about how important it is that we have a transaction with books, that we experience that connection with it. Because if we don't have that transaction, if we don't have that connection inside, then any conversation after that's meaningless.
Right.
And okay,
I'm sorry, Todd. I know you rolled your eyes at that, but I had to bring that in because I love.
I only rolled my eyes because I knew you were going to bring up somebody from the 1920s or 30s.
There's a crazy echo happening.
It's Travis.
He's fixed it. I think we just need to say there's an echo always, so Travis will mute himself no matter what.
Oh, I love it. Score one for Jennifer. High five.
I'm just teasing, but I want to touch on something. Can I veer off and bird walk for just a second?
You're Jennifer Lagarde. That's what you do. Go ahead.
So, and I'm going to pick on Travis just a second. And Travis, I'm going to say this is something I do all the time too. So I'm pointing it out in myself as well, not just in you or other people. I've been thinking about this a lot recently because it's not my brainchild. It's something I heard Chad Everett say recently. And Chad C. Everett on Twitter is just someone I really admire in terms of the world of literacy work. But he was talking about the habit we have of saying that a book changes our lives. And he said, that's not really true unless the book sparks you to take some sort of action. A lot of times we read books and we feel all the feels and we tell all our friends and we cry and we talk about how great it is and maybe we even give it away. But unless we take some kind of action as a result of having read that book or change our own thinking or change the way we do things in the world, it's not really accurate to say it's changed our lives. And so I've been thinking about like that for myself as someone who talks a lot about books. And as I think about books, I'm like, well, does this book really have the potential to change my behavior in some way? Or is that in some way the hope? Maybe do I think that might have been the hope of the author? Is this what the author hoped might happen, that it might change or influence somebody's thinking or behavior? And if so, what am I going to do about it? What is a way that I can allow the power of books to change the world manifest in me? How can I be an example of that? And it's totally fine to read books that don't change your life, but that are meaningful to you and that you recommend to others. That's totally fine. But if there are ways that a book can help you be a better or more of something person, then I think particularly those of us who have an audience of some kind, I think it's important for us to be transparent about that, to say, gosh, I read this book and this is what was meaningful. And as a result, I'm going to do this. Because I think that is an important power of story and books. And I just feel like for myself, that's something I want to be a little bit better at doing.
Well, and that leads perfectly into the end of our show and the question we love to end on. We always end every one of our episodes with new book recommendations of something we've just read or are fixing to read that we think others should check out too. So, Jennifer, we're going to start and you're going to end because you're our guest. So, Travis, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first? Okay, so I'll go first. So my next book on my list, and if you've been listening to our episodes, we've talked this book before. This is the next book I am reading. Brad Gustafson recommended this to me, and I've heard Dusty Bowling, author of Insignificant Events, Life of a Cactus, said this was amazing. So this is my next book that I'm going to read. It's Forget Me Not by Ellie Terry. But the books I just finished, I mean, I mentioned Jason Reynolds a minute ago, but I just read The Wild Robot, and then it's a sequel that just came out, The Wild Robot Escapes. I loved those so much. And I don't care what age you teach, that would be such a fun read aloud. Get ready. There are some moments that'll make you tear up, especially in the second one. But oh my gosh, they're super easy to read. I love the creativity in them, but they're The Wild Robot and The Wild Robot Escapes. Just great books. So Travis, what are you recommending today?
All right, I'm going to do this and pray that there's not an echo, because I want to talk about Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. I recently reread it. We're going into, in my social studies classes, we're going into a discussion, conversation, and a study of World War II. And what I'm going to do is encourage all of my students in social studies to pick up a book that is World War II related, whether it be fiction or nonfiction. And I've been trying to read them, as many of them as I can, so that when we start school on Monday, because we've been on spring break, I can book talk these books to them and say, this is a book you may enjoy. And I read Between Shades of Grey 7 years ago. I bought it at the book fair, and I took it back to my classroom, and this was, 7 years transpire, and I pick it up again, and I'm like, I really want to return to this one. I had no idea how much I would be drawn, how I would be drawn into the story, and how I would live and reside with these characters. The story follows this young girl. Her name is Lena, and her family, as they are ripped away from their from their home in the night, and they are taken, and they make this rather arduous journey from Lithuania all the way up to the Arctic Circle, which is where the actual narrative piece with those characters ends. And I'm not giving anything away. You see that, you notice that that's on the map at the beginning of the book. But the thing that I am taking away from this one is just how powerfully I resided with those characters throughout. And you want to talk a book that is going to really thump on your heart, that's going to tug at your heartstrings, this story will. And Ruta's Miss Sepetys's second book is, not the second book, but the follow-up to that one is Salt to the Sea, which I have read, but I can't wait to return to it, because those are two books that I finished. Todd, I talked to you about that one on Tuesday, right? I think it was Tuesday morning. I think I shared that one with you, and it's lingered in my mind. Can't get it out of my head. I'm actually getting ready to start a professional book that will make both of you roll your eyes. But I'm getting ready to start this one.
Hold on. Is it Penny Kittle?
It's the new Penny Kittle book.
It's 180 Days, which is Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle share their thinking and their lessons over the course of a year. And I'm really excited to dig into this one. So this is what I'll be reading next.
Okay, Jennifer, your turn. Mute Mike.
Sure. Okay, so I'm waiting for Travis to meet himself. There he goes. Okay. So the first book I'm going to recommend is a picture book, actually, which is unusual for me because I typically read young adult literature, middle and high school books. But I'm sure both of you have read, but those of you out there who haven't read it yet, I think a book that would be worth picking up is Crown, Ode to the Fresh Cut by Derek Barnes, I believe. I'm really bad about authors, so you guys will have to look it up for me. But it won a Caldecott honor. Maybe it won the Caldecott. No, it didn't win the Caldecott. It was a Caldecott honor. Sorry, I'm really messing this up. But it is a picture book in verse about that is really based on the author's experience as a young African-American male growing up in Kansas City and what a trip to the barbershop meant to him. And it's all about this sort of barbershop culture in the African-American community, and the idea that just a haircut can make us feel so good. And it reminds me of an event that a friend of mine used to have back in North Carolina for her elementary school kids. She called it Look Good, Feel Good, Do Good. And where local barbers and hairdressers would come in and with parent permission, give kids haircuts at her school, which was very high poverty. And for a lot of those kids, it was the first professional haircut they'd ever had. And it's a pretty neat thing. And that book is beautifully written. The illustrations are gorgeous. And I just think it's a powerful picture book about a really unusual topic that I've never seen done before. It's been highly praised, and I would absolutely recommend it to other people. So,
well, thank you, Jennifer, for making me $13 poorer, because it is Crown and Ode to the Fresh Cut by Derek Barnes.
Oh, I got that right.
It's on Amazon, so I just ordered mine because that sounds so awesome. So thank you.
I got one more.
Travis,
Wait a minute.
Go ahead.
You guys got to do two now. Come on. All right. So, if you haven't already read Children of Blood and Bone, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the author's last name, I'll let Todd do that. I highly recommend it. It is a book for middle or high school readers, but you could decide if it was right for your readers. And it is a fantasy novel that I love so much because it is based on African myths. And first of all, I enjoyed the narrative. I enjoyed the novel itself. Is very high paced. Very fast paced. I don't want to give anything away, but it's basically a society in which people with darker skin are considered to be lesser than people with lighter skin, even though everyone in these communities have dark skin. If the darker it is, then the less valued you are in society. And because it's fantasy, it involves mythical creatures and a mythical world and magic powers, et cetera, et cetera. But those of you who read fantasy books or sci-fi books, then you know that is a largely homogenous genre in which most of the characters are white. And there are very few characters of color in that genre. And I think it's important that we hand kids books where the characters look like them, but not every kid of color wants to read about a kid living in an urban setting who is either getting arrested or playing basketball. I think I had the same experience when Rick Riordan's books about the Red Pyramid series came out. And I remember a young man in my school at the time who read that book and said, he's an African-American male, and he said how excited he was. He said, are there other books like this with Black kids? That's exactly what his question was, because all of his friends were reading, the Lightning Thief series, also by Rick Riordan. They were super popular at the time, but all the characters, certainly the main characters in those books, didn't look like he did. And so this series, which wasn't nearly as popular as the other books, spoke to him because here's a fantasy series where the characters and the heroes look like him. And so I really love the Children of Blood and Bone, and the author's name, I can't pronounce it. Todd, I'll let you do it.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now because, when Jennifer says to get a book, I'm like, I got to get it. It looks like Tomi Adeyemi.
That sounds perfect to me. Yeah, and it is certainly, I think it's an important book, and I think it's worth reading. So that's one I've been just finished and have been recommending a lot.
Awesome. Well, Jennifer, Travis and I adore you. I'm so glad you came back for a part 2. We already know we're going to have you back for a part 3 at some point just because we love talking to you so much. But we want to thank all of our listeners and viewers as well. If you want to win one of the books that we just recommended, then what we ask for you to do at the end of every Sparks in the Dark episode now is to go on Twitter and tweet out a book that you are reading right now using the hashtag Sparks Sparks in the Dark. And what we'll do is we'll wait a week, and then we'll go through the hashtag, and we will pull one lucky winner to win one of the books that we just recommended, book of your choice. So thank you, everybody, for listening and hanging out with us today, and we hope you have a great evening.
Hey, Todd?
Yes.
Before you stop it, can I give them one other chance to win?
Sure.
Okay, so I just want to mention that on Facebook every Monday, I give away a book inspired by our friend Donalyn Miller, a book that I think will help inspire empathy and acceptance and a broader and deeper understanding of diverse cultures and the beauty in our global family. And so every Monday I do that on Facebook. All the books I mentioned today, I've given away there before. So if you follow me on Facebook, you don't even have to be my friend, so I don't have to be up in your business. You can just follow me. On Mondays, you can look for those giveaways, and perhaps you could be the next one to win.
I love it. Definitely check those out, guys, because those are a great way to get free books into your classroom. So everybody have a great evening.
Thank you.